All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this semester's course selection workshop. My name is Alicia, and me, Megan, and Jay will be your guides to course selection for fall 2022. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so first we're going to cover kind of general tips, especially if you are a freshman. This will be super helpful just to know some general tips about enrollment. Next, we're going to jump into the statistics and data science major requirements. And then we're going to go through all of the fall 2022 courses. And then lastly, we're going to end with some final thoughts and a Q&A. All right. So general tips for enrollment. I'll start off. Okay, so hints and tips for scheduling. This is just like a quick little like process that you could go through. Finding a class that you like and are interested in. You can read on classes.berkeley.edu all of the course descriptions and all of the minutia and details. But check to see if you fulfill the prerequisites or the requirements. Make sure the professor is good by either like checking online for ratings, asking in Slack, or attending like one of that professor's current classes for a day to kind of see if you mesh with their teaching style. Also, like in this session, we will give our opinions about like professors' teaching styles where there has been a professor already assigned for that class. So this is also a good resource for that. Make sure that the class and final exam times don't conflict with other required courses unless it specifically says that it's okay if there's a time conflict, just because usually people will not be happy if you're like, hello, I need another final exam time. And often they'll just tell you to drop the class and take it again another term. And also use Berkeley time to look at like the grade distribution for the class, but also you can look at the previous enrollment history, which can also help you determine whether you should phase 1 a class or you can risk phase 2ing a class and still get into it. All right. So once you've decided which classes that you can and you want to take, you should sign up in general for your required classes in phase 1. There are some exceptions to this rule and we'll get into it. There are some classes that will expand in size, but generally, like if you need a class, you should sign up for phase 1. And then sign up for your like favored secondary courses in phase 2. If your secondary class is full, sign up for the waitlist and then like also sign up for a different class. Just because like there isn't really a point in holding back from signing up for another class and hoping to get in on the waitlisted course. Obviously, like if you're over the unit limit, you will have to pick one or the other for phase 2. But if you can, please try to like kind of sign up for more than you can take at first and then drop, because it's a lot easier to sign up for more and drop than like spend all your time on the waitlist for one and then like have to scramble to like find a new breadth or something like last minute right before the ad deadline. All right. Okay, so does anyone have any, before we get into major requirements, does anyone have any like questions about general tips for enrollment at this point, or it's also okay if not? Okay, cool. In that case, we can jump right into major requirements. So first, we're going to be going over the stats major requirements. So I'll hand it over to Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. So basically, these will be the prereqs for if you're trying to major in stats. So with stats specifically, for all these prereq classes, you need to get at least a C in Math 1A, Math 1B, 53, 54, and either Stat 20 or Data 8. So and then along with that, a separate part of the prereq is going to be Stat 134/140 or Stat 135. So I kind of say the prereqs are split into two parts. It's the primary like math like foundation, which is the first 5 courses you saw over here. And then they're the two primary stat classes that like prepare you for operative, which is Stat 134/140 or Stat 135. So with those two classes, 134, 140, and 135, you have to get a B minus in all of them. But the more math foundation ones, you can get at least a C. But no matter what, your total GPA needs to cumulatively average out to 3.2 in order for you to declare the major. So specifically, just my recommendation, a lot of you guys will probably be able to circumvent the Math 1A, Math 1B requirement. Again, most of your second semester, so you can leave this, but Calc A, B, and BC will serve as replacements for 1A and 1B. So really, I think the main math courses you're going to have to take are 53, 54, and between Stat 20 and Data 8, I personally recommend Data 8 just because it has more of an applied focus and you're doing more programming with that. But Stat 20 is also a good class just to get a little bit of like basic stat foundation. And yeah, so these are going to be the prereq classes you're going to have to take. Now, with upper division requirements, it's split up into 3 sections now. So you have your core classes, your electives, and your cluster courses. So with core classes, some of it kind of intersects with the prereqs. So 134 and 135 are technically operatives, but they're also prereqs for you to declare the major. So again, when I say 134, it's 134 or 140. So going down the list, the first core stat operative that everyone has to take is stat 133, concepts in computing with data. But another replacement for this is doing doing data 100 or stat C100, if you call it that, and pairing that with stat 33B. So essentially, data 100 will teach you all the programming concepts, like data analysis, data cleaning, etc. And stat 33B will give you the R programming foundations. Meanwhile, stat 133 kind of just does everything in R. So that's the primary difference between the 2 tracks there. Stat 134 and stat 140 basically are the main probability courses you'll take in undergrad stat. So 134 and 140 basically teach the same concepts, they're just taught in a little bit of different ways. And stat 135 will teach you like the primary main statistical methods that you'll need for most stat operatives. So you'll see like various stat topics that are required moving forward basically as an undergrad stat major. Now, the second part of the operative major requirements are your elective. So specifically with electives, you need 3 of these electives. So mainly people will call these the STAT 150 series. So the STAT 150 series, you'll have to take 3 classes from it. So along with the STAT 150 series, recently the stat department has added data 102. You can take this as part of your elective as well. So you just need to take 3 classes from these, and of those 3 classes, one of them have to be a lab. So you can't just, I mean, regardless, I think if you were to take 3 anyways, you'll be forced to take a lab class, but the only ones that don't have a lab for like are going to be stat 150 and stat 155, but everything else will have some sort of programming aspect to it, hence why there's a lab section as well. So just 3 of these classes for your upper division requirement. Yeah, and finally, you have to take 3 classes of a specific cluster. So STAT will have a bunch of various clusters that you can add to the major. So these clusters can just be stat related classes. Well, not necessarily stat related classes, but just classes in fields related to statistics that form a cluster. So let's say you want to form a CS cluster, you'll take classes like CS 188, 186, and 160. You can take 170, 188, 189. So the second one would be more like a theoretical CS cluster versus the first one, which is more applied. If you want to do an econ cluster, you can do one of the 2, 3 clusters. If you don't want to do one of the clusters that's outlined in the stat major website, I don't know if there's a link to that right now, but if you don't want to do one of the primary clusters, one thing you could do is you can talk to your advisor and form your own cluster. So let's say you have some sort of interest and you think 3 classes kind of create a comprehensive cluster. You could create your own cluster and also have those 3 classes work as your cluster for the major.
All right, cool. So moving on to the data science major prerequisites and requirements in general. So for the prereqs, or mainly lower divs, it's a minimum 2.0 GPA and no lower than a C- in basically the following classes, which include like 1A or equivalent for math, math 1B. Note that you can take like 10A or 16A, but they pretty much force you to take 1B for calc. Data 8, math 54, which is linear algebra and differential equations. But actually, this is new as of next semester, but you can actually replace it with math 91, which is a new course that they're making. And data science and stats majors can use this to replace the linear algebra requirement. Another replacement that's pretty popular is EE16A and 16B. There are several replacement possibilities that are also listed on the data science website for linear algebra. Okay, and then for CS classes that you'll have to take, you'll need to take either 61A or CS88, which are both program structures classes. And we'll get into the difference between these later on when we compare classes that are going to be offered next term. And then CS61B, which is data structures. And note that specifically, you'll have to have a minimum 2.0 average in data 8, whatever your linear algebra class is, and 61B. So it's both like having that minimum 2.0 GPA for all of these classes and specifically for these 3 call-out classes. Okay, cool. All right, so moving right along to the upper division classes, you will have to take Data 100. So that's kind of not like a choice class, but for literally every other requirement, you do have a choice on what class you take. So there'll be 2 classes that have to do with computation, 1 probability class, 1 modeling class, 3 classes for your domain emphasis, and 1 HCE or human context and ethics class. Okay. So for your computational and inferential depth, they want you to take 2 classes, but those 2 classes have to make up at least 7 units from this list. They have a much larger list than this actually on the website, but these are some common ones that people will take. And the reason why they say at least 7 units is because several of these classes are 3 units. So like, for example, data 144, data mining and analytics is a 3-unit class. So you cannot take 2 3-unit classes. You have to take at least like a 3-unit or a 4-unit to fulfill this requirement. Otherwise, you'll have to take another class. And so some common classes that people will take are CS 162, 170, 188, data 144, econ 140. There's also like the environmental econ version of 140 that's on this list as well. Info 159, stat 135, 150, or 151A. In the chat, we have a question for the computational and inferential depth. Which courses are the most relevant for the industry in data analysis and fintech entry roles? I honestly think fintech, I mean, I think it totally depends because I think data analyst is a really wide range of roles. But for fintech, if you're specifically interested in that, I would take Econ 140 or 141, which is like the econometrics class. I think like most of the classes I would find to be useful, maybe like not CS classes specifically, but like most of the other classes I think I would find to be useful for just data analyst roles in general. Yeah.
To add on to that, maybe for fintech, if you're specifically talking about like quant, I think something like stochastic processes could be potentially very useful for that, because me personally, I find like a lot of stuff in stochastic processes you end up using in finance.
Yes, that's true. And also if you're like scared by 150 or you like would rather not take a stats upper div class, they also have another stochastic processes class that fits into this list as well, which is IEOR 173 or Introduction to Stochastic Processes. That also counts for this depth. So this list has a lot of like classes that are kind of on the same thing, but with like a slightly different focus or taught by different departments. Yeah. Okay. For probability, you can choose one from SAT 134 and 140, which we mentioned earlier, or industrial engineering 172 and EECS 126. And note that only one of these classes can count towards the major of like this list, because like EECS 126, for example, is in both the probability bin and also in the like computational depth bin. So you can't have it like, you can't be sneaky and be like, oh, I want to count this for probability and computational. Like you have to choose one. And also like you can't do, I guess like you can't double up and count like 150 and 126 towards the major as well. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then for modeling, learning, and decision making, you will choose one class from CS 182, CS 189, Data 102, Industrial Engineering 142, and SAT 154. A lot of times we'll get questions in advice that are asking about like the difference between these classes. These classes are all actually like really, really different, and it's kind of like wild that they're all under the same bin, but they are really different, and we'll kind of get into the specifics of some of these classes when we go over like the course offerings for fall 2022. All right. Okay, and then the domain emphasis. So you will have to take 3 domain emphasis courses that are each at least 3 units. So 2 of them will be upper division courses and at least 1 lower division course. That's like a prerequisite. Sometimes they'll actually have like more than 1 lower division class that you have to take. So the courses that you take to like qualify for the upper divs, but the courses that you take for the 7 course, like LNS breadth, actually might fulfill the lower division course for a domain. And so, you know, we've linked some lists for domain emphases that are currently approved, and they're adding more all the time, actually. Like I think they've added at least like 3 since the time that I declared data, and also a guide for the 7 course breadth requirement for LNS if you're in LNS. Okay. So some examples of domain emphases include, if you want to do applied math and modeling, Math 53, Math 110, and Math 128A. If you're doing business and industrial analytics as your domain emphasis, you could take Econ 1, Engineering 120, and UGBA 104. If you're doing economics as your domain emphasis, you could do Econ 2, Econ 101A, and Econ 119. If you're doing linguistics as your domain emphasis, you could do like Ling 100, Ling 120, and Info 159, for example. Yeah, and there are so many more domain emphases than this. Like I cannot stress enough how like expansive the list of domain emphases are. So go and check out the major website if you want to see like the whole extensive list. All right. And so now we'll go into the specific fall 2022 course options. And I think we'll take a little break between the lower divs and the upper divs to give some time for people who are only joining for the upper divs to come. Okay, so the first one up is Data 8, good old Data 8, Foundations of Data Science. So like a lot of the classes right now, actually, it's like totally in flux. Like they didn't say who the professor is yet. The class size is like they expand, but they say 744 on the course catalog. When to sign up. I don't know when they'll release this. You might be able to phase 1 it if they release it before phase 1. I honestly think it might be safe to phase 2 it though, just because they do expand. But yeah, this is probably a class that you will take even if you don't have to, just because I think everyone ends up taking it, or like most people at Berkeley end up taking it, regardless of like major or whatever their interest is. Yeah, and there are no prereqs. This is truly meant to be like an intro class. Right.
Cool, yeah. So for Stat 20, you can kind of think about this as like the main like intro to probability and statistics. So you'll also see like a lot of other majors in this class. So even from like certain humanities fields or like even other like STEM majors, just because it's a very like it's like kind of like the math 1A for stats, I'd say. So it's for students with a mathematical background who wish to acquire basic concepts, relative frequency, discrete probability, random variables, expectation, testing hypothesis, estimation, illustrations of various fields. So if any of you have taken AP stats in high school, I'd say it's somewhat similar to the concepts there. So either I'd recommend taking it if let's say you feel like you didn't really get great stats background from AP stats and you want to kind of strengthen that and not take data, then I'd recommend taking Stat 20. If you haven't taken AP stats and you want to strengthen your like foundation and don't really want to go into the applied stuff of data 8, then I'd also recommend taking Stat 20 in that case as well. For Stat 33, essentially, let me just read this question. Yeah, so we're gonna get into stat 134 and stat 140 just shortly, so I'll answer your question then. But for stat 33A, so this is an introduction to advanced R. So basically, I think this is both of these are going to be 2-unit courses. So this is going to be a course that prepares students for data analysis with R, the focus on computational model that underlies the R language with the goal of providing a foundation for coding. So the best way I'd probably describe both 33A and 33B is 33A is like a beginner like course on how to code stuff in R. And then 33B is like a little bit more of an advanced course on how to code stuff in R. So a lot of times you don't have to take 33A to take 33B. Most students end up just taking 33B directly instead. So it's kind of just like they go through multiple parts of R and you'll have a programming assignment kind of showing like if you have mastery over like a certain topic, like let's say using data frames or using a certain like function in R, like basically what 33A and B are meant to prepare you for. And when to sign up, phase 1 would be a good time.
All right, 61A. This is the good old Berkeley Introduction to CS course. So it's an introductory program course that for a lot of people is the first computer science course they'll take at Berkeley. It covers pretty much everything from intro to programming to regression to object-oriented programming. Then I think at the end they used to have SQL, but I believe they took it out for future semesters. So I would say this class is pretty challenging. This class will vary a lot in terms of difficulty, depending on how much programming background you have. So if you have a lot of programming background going into it, you will find this is relatively less time consuming because you will have seen these concepts before. But if you are like me and you came into it with no to like little to no programming background, it is definitely doable. It just will be a bit more time consuming as you will have to spend longer on the labs and projects, and you will probably have to go to tutoring sections for like maximum effect. So I would say budget your time wisely on this, but it has no prereqs. It's 4 units. 1.5 hours of lab plus 1.5 hours of discussion. You will be spending more than that, especially when projects roll around. Professor, TBA, but like they're roughly the same, to be honest. And this is a pretty safe class to phase 2. Oh, CS88. So CS88 is like 61A light. It's the intro to programming course directed towards non-computer science major students. So kind of, which is mentioned before, you will see a lot of non-CS majors like humanity majors or like bio majors and whatnot in this class. I would say it's basically a pared down version of 61A. You cover the same material except for they cut out STEAM at the end. So they cut out like a good 1/4 of the course. So it's a lot slower. If you have no programming experience, this is a really good introduction to programming. However, with that said, the class is significantly less organized, I would say, than 61A, just because 61A has been around the block for a long time. And the professor is decent, but I do find that I think concept-wise, 61A had a better lecture style. So it is 2 hours lab per week. Again, you will also have projects, the same 61A projects, in fact. So you will be spending more than that when projects roll around. It's 3 units and it's probably not available till phase 2.
Oh wait, this might be a slide whoopsie on my part. But it's not available right now. Some of these will say probably not available until phase 2. It's not available right now, but it will maybe be available before phase 1, hopefully, if CS gets their stuff together. But yeah, sorry about that.
Oh yeah, I guess adding to that, a thing to note is that like the CS department really doesn't have their stuff together for this year. So a lot of the classes, they've been having like continuous enrollment issues, as in their class sizes aren't big enough. So I think this is more of a prominent issue in upper divs, but like stuff that you used to be able to phase 2 probably is a better idea now to phase 1, just due to they've stopped expanding class sizes for a bunch of stuff. All right, we kind of went through this before, but 61A versus 88. So 61A is for a more general computing technical audience that has more diverse goals, while CS88 is for students who don't necessarily want to major in like in EECS or CS. Yeah, the 88 mainly differs from 61A in terms of it removes scheme. And it's totally fine to take if you're doing data science. For 61A, I would recommend if you're going for a more serious software route. So that would be like 61B, then like 161, 162, the more like traditional CS software route. 61A will give you a better foundation than 88. But if you are going for a data science type of role, I think 88 is totally fine as well. Why is it still me? Okay, 61B, data structures. So this is the Berkeley Traditional Data Science course. It covers basically the fundamentals of software engineering. So it goes from everything from data structures, so that's like linear lists, linked lists, trees, queues, array strings, hash tables, storage management. It talks about it goes through a lot of the stuff you'll see in like software engineering interviews, like calculate runtime of different programs, abstraction, abstract data types, simple algorithms for sorting and searching, all that good stuff. And it's the introduction to Java. This course, I would say it isn't that conceptually difficult, but it is a lot of project work. So it's a very project-based class, especially if Hilfinger is teaching it. If Hilfinger is teaching it, you can literally fail the exams and do all the projects and still get an A. So it's that project heavy. When projects roll around, that 1 week that you're cramming the project is going to be really, really tight. So do keep that in mind. I think it's it's not a super difficult class, but it's a very time consuming class. So 2-hour labs, 1 hour discussion per week. That is on a normal week. When project weeks roll around, you will be spending more time on it. And it's also probably not available till phase 2, and you need 61A or CS88 as a prereq for this.
Sorry again, guys. This might be a slide whoopsie, depending on when the CS department gets it together, but hopefully before phase 1. But it's also usually safe to phase 2 because they expand it quite a bit traditionally.
Cool. So with STAT 133, Was Stat 88 skipped, by the way?
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
It was skipped. Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. I will talk about Stat 88. Yeah, so for Stat 88, this is a class that people will take like usually like instead of Stat 20 a lot of the times I've seen. It's probability and mathematical statistics and data science. And it's technically a connector course to Data 8. Like all of these like something 88 classes are connector courses to Data 8. So like there'll even be ones like demography 88 or like physics 88 that are all these like connector courses. So it basically goes over a lot of topics, including probability, conditioning, and independence, random variables, distribution, joint distributions, expectation, variance, tail bounds, like central limit theorem, bias variance trade-off, and a lot of this good stuff. And the prereqs are Math 1A and Data 8, but Data 8 can be concurrent. It is 3 units, and there's a 2-hour discussion section. There's 2 hours of discussion section per week. The professor is to be announced and the class size is 300, but I would still recommend that you sign up for it phase 1, just because a lot of other majors will be trying to take it. I know this is a really popular one for econ majors as well to take as their like stats requirement. People will take Stat 20 as well, but I think 88 has been like gaining traction and gaining popularity. I also think like it will take like, I took it in freshman year and at that point it was 2 units and it definitely was more than 2 units of work. I think the 3 unit mark is pretty much like on par with the amount of work that you'll have to do per week for the class. So yeah, definitely a recommendation for like a beginning like stats class, especially if you're an econ major. Okay. Now on to 133.
Cool. So so Stat 133 is concepts in computing with data. So the description states it's an introduction to computation and intensive applied statistics. You'll go through organization and use of databases, visualizations and graphics, statistical learning and data mining, model validation procedures, and the presentation of results. So my whole thing with this class is I'd recommend, so this class is going to be a prereq for statistics. So I would instead recommend people to take Data 100 and Stat 33B, even though it's 5 units taking that. I definitely think it's a lot more worth your time because Data 100 is almost exactly at many data science or data analytics positions. Stat 133 doesn't go over the concepts as well as Data 100, and Stat 133 teaches everything in R. So it's generally just a much less applicable class than a class like Data 100. So basically by doing Data 100 and Stat 33B, you're really drilling in the data cleaning and data science topics Stat 133 to talk about, but it's a lot better in Data 100. And you're also getting the R background from taking Stat 33B. So if you don't want to take those many classes, Data 100 and Stat 33B, then I guess Stat 133 is a class to take instead. But I highly recommend rather than taking Stat 133, you take the 2 others instead.
Okay, so moving on to math. So math 53, multivariable calculus. Yeah, this is just like the multivariable calculus class. You can see from the description what they go over. Prereqs are 1A and 1B or equivalent. It's a 4-unit class with 3 hours of discussion per week. The professors, there are 2 lectures of it. So it's like Kanik and Scythian. And lecture 1 is 450 people and lecture 2 is 500. Even though the class sizes are pretty big, I would actually still recommend to phase 1 it, just because a lot of majors do have to take 53, especially in like COE or a lot of the natural sciences have to take 53. And so to be safe, like I really think that you should phase 1 it, especially because it is a prereq for several upper divs. And so you don't really want to delay, I guess, getting into those upper divs because you haven't completed the prerequisites yet. But yeah. Okay, and then 54. very popular math lower div class. This is like the basic linear algebra class. We'll get into some of like the upper division, like continuations of linear algebra classes later as well. Very important for data science majors, statistics majors, but also, again, most COE majors and natural sciences. And so again, the prereqs are Math 1A and 1B or equivalent. And it is 4 units. Again, with the 3 hours of discussion per week. And the professors are Serganova and Lin. I really like Lin. So I don't know, if you can take both and you want my recommendation of professor, I like Lin. Class size, again, they're pretty big, 400 for lecture 1 and 450 for lecture 2. But again, would still recommend signing up in phase 1 because of the popularity for, or like the necessity as a prereq for so many classes. Like I think most classes that I've taken as upper divisions have been like, oh, you need Math 54 or equivalent to be in this class. So phase 1 to be safe so that you don't like delay the classes that use this class as a prereq.
Okay, yeah, sorry, just quick question. Should we take a break for the rest of the upper div classes? I'm not too sure.
I think 134 we can count as a
Lower
like
div?
a
Okay,
prereq.
cool.
Yeah,
Got it.
but after this, I think we should.
Got it. So, so some info about STAT 134 specifically. So, Michael, kind of like, hopefully this answers a little bit more of your question. We'll go into a comparison soon as well. But 134 is basically, well, it used to be the primary main probability theory class in Berkeley. So basically an introduction to probability. It's a little more advanced than a class like STAT 88. So it goes over conditional expectation, independence, law of large numbers, screening continuous random variables, central limit theorem, and various selected topics that your professor will specifically go into. Just from my experience, usually it's joint distributions and Poisson processes and a little bit of Markov chains, but and maybe moment generating functions. That's also a pretty big topic, especially when Lucas teaches it, which I'm not too sure if he's teaching this next semester. So the prereqs are pretty soft for STAT 134 because it is like the intro probability theory course. 53 and 54 are very soft prereqs. Just from my experience, basically no 53 or 54 is used in STAT 134. The only hard prereqs I would say are going to be Math 1A and 1B because there's quite a bit of calculus used in STAT 134. It's a 4-unit class. I would say the amount of work in this class isn't too much. It's usually just a problem set per every week. And the problem set's not even graded on accuracy. It's just graded on completion, partial completion, if that like at that too. So if you do like 6 out of the 8 questions, you'll get full credit. So I wouldn't say it's a very time intensive class in that respect, but I'd say the reason this class gets a bit of like a bad rap is because it's like a lot of people's first ever probability theory course, and it's a pretty big jump, like especially from high school to college, taking your first probability theory course, especially if you've never done it before. So I'd say the learning curve for a lot of people is pretty high for STAT 134, and that's what you're going to be spending a lot of time on, just really like trying to understand certain concepts. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good course, especially if you want to like get yourself like ingrained with like probability concepts. Just another note about this class is entirely theoretical. So basically everything will just be problem sets and theoretical questions. Even in midterms and finals, most of the questions will revolve around some sort of like equation or some sort of like theory heavy kind of question. Very rarely do we have like word problems or like sometimes word problems, but like, you know, it's more on the theory side, and you're not going to be doing like any sort of coding with this class, unlike let's say a class like STAT 88. Okay, now for 140 is the alternate class you could take instead of STAT 134. So I think now it's called Data 140 because the data science department essentially just adopted it. So it's the probability course for data science. So The main difference between this and Stat 134 is Data 140 has a very strong um, coding component to the class. So like Stat 134, you'll still be going over the same concepts where in the same probability concepts such as random variables, discrete and continuous families, bounds and approximations, dependence, conditioning, Bayesian methods, like all of that you'll still see in Data 140, except when you do problem sets with Data 140, you'll have some sort of coding component along with that. So I'd say definitely the problem sets will take a lot longer for a class like Data 140. And towards the end of the class, they do sprinkle in some extra topics that are not related to just specifically probability. So you'll see some stuff like least squares prediction, Markov chains even, and then stuff like what else? Order statistics. So they do cover a little bit, a few more topics. I think, I'm not sure if they put this here, but they do go over like a maximum likelihood estimate as well in Data 140. So they have some auxiliary topics that aren't fully just probability theory. So yeah, Data 140 you can think of as the probability course that has coding plus a few other auxiliary topics. And talking a little bit about the prereqs, it's the same as Stat 134, except now they're adding in Data 8 and Data 100 as a prereq. So I think Data 100 isn't really a strong prereq, but Data 8 is definitely a strong prereq that they enforce. So you can't take this class unless you've taken Data 8, because that's basically the only indication to them that you've taken some sort of like data science coding course, or you know how to code in Python. Math 54 also is a strong prereq for this class. So like Stat 134, there are definitely more prereqs to actually get into Stat 140. And enrollment, just speaking from my experience, the one reason I took Stat 134 was over Stat 140 is because I was enrolling in a probability course phase 2, Data 140 was taken, so I took Stat 134 instead. So I kind of forgot to talk about this for Stat 134, but enrollment isn't too much of an issue for Stat 134 if you enroll phase 1. It's more like when you start doing phase 2 or adjustment period, it's a lot harder to get into the class. Stat 140, I don't know what the reserve seats are like. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alicia or Megan, I think they're reserved for data science and stat majors, and everyone else you'll be placed on a wait list. So something like Data 140, I'd recommend doing phase 1 because seats will fill up very fast with Data 140.
Onto this because I took 140. I don't remember about reserve seating, but it was definitely like you have to phase 1 kind of class, and you may not even get into phase 1 if you're not stats or data science major. The other thing about 140 is that even though it is more coding heavy than 134, just because it has coding, I wouldn't be intimidated by the coding. Like the amount, it's not like CS programming where you have to like, it's not like 61A or 61B programming. It's really like Data 8 programming where you just need to call functions in a package, like scipy.do this function, scipy.solve this integral. That's it. So as long as if you've taken Data 8 and you know the programming in there, you are totally fine in terms of 140 programming.
Also to add on, like as Jay was saying, I don't think they actually have reserved seating as of right now for 140, but I do think like regardless of that, like I also couldn't even phase 1 it because I had a bad enrollment time when I was signing up. So that's why I also took like Stat 134. So like this needs to be like your number 1 priority, like yeet into the class, like with the skin of your teeth. And like for the Data 100 thing, it's like either you have to have taken like Data 8 or like Data 100, or like technically I think they let you grandfather in Stat 20 plus 61A in the past. I think they still let you do this, but it has to be both of them. So just like any of those like 3 options are allowed. And I think nowadays most people have taken Data 8 before they've taken Data 100. So don't worry if you haven't taken Data 100 and you're trying to get into Stat 140.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point, especially because like main reason they have data is just like so they know you know how to like do like use certain data science packages in Python. Okay, so I think this will answer a lot of people's questions, especially when doing the probability requirement for both stats and data science. So essentially, I know there's classes like EX126 and UR170. There's like other probability classes, but I'd say 90% of people will probably fall into one of these two camps, Stat 134 or Stat 140. So Stat 134 is for a more general audience that has more diverse goals. So just for some context, I was a Stat 134 TA last semester. So when I was looking at like a lot of the students, a lot of them came from a lot of different majors. So a lot of them were engineering, a lot of them were CS, math. So not all of them really had, like an interest with coding. They just kind of had to either fill out a stats requirement or they just wanted to learn probability so that the theoretical foundation for classes afterwards. So I feel like for that reason, it does have a much more diverse audience because it has a very standardized probability theory kind of feel to it. It doesn't have a running thread of inference, so you're not going to do like hypothesis testing or any sort of that statistics stuff. So students who want to go into inference after 134 should do 135. Like meanwhile for like Stat 140, if you don't want to get like a strong inference background, you could get away with just the inference you learn from a class like Stat 140. And Stat 134 has basically zero prereqs besides just calculus. So it assumes you have no probability background or inference background coming into it. So it's really just like for any student who has a decent calculus foundation, this is your class to learn probability theory. Stat 140, on the other hand, is primarily tailored for stats and data science students specifically. So I'd say the class is almost all just stats, data science, or even CS. You rarely see any like cross disciplines like going into Stat 140. And also it's for students who have an inference background and might want to go directly into a modeling or learning class. Like we'll talk about this later, data 102. So in that case, Stat 140 is a much better class because as some of you already know, data 8 has like an inference part to the class. So you definitely will have some sort of like, inference background coming into Stat 140. And a lot of the material is tailored for people who have that inference background. So assumes, like I said, assumes data 8 or Stat 20, which contain only the basics of probability, but a ton of inference. So like one thing they might do in Stat 140 is they might drop in like hypothesis testings here and there. And you're just expected to know it based on the prereqs, even if it's not directly like related to like the probability you're learning. They kind of just expect you to have that like sort of like statistical maturity with certain topics. And like I said, it's also probability with an eye towards modeling and learning applications. So a lot of the homework assignments you have, let's say for like, random variables, you'll see how random variables modeling at like or machine learning like aspect. So you're not just going to be seeing like how to solve like a find a probability distribution for like a random variable. You'll see how you can actually use it for something a little bit bigger. So I definitely say for data science specifically, Stat 140 is definitely the way to go. So I recommend most people in SAAS to take Stat 140 because I think just long term it's a much better class because it covers the same material as Stat 134, and it definitely shows how it can be used in many different domains. But the main takeaway is both are inherently just mathy classes. So no matter what you do, this will be like both classes are going to be very theoretical and they're going to be like your foundational probability classes at the end of the day. So either one you can really go wrong with. Yeah, so now moving on to Stat 135. So Stat 135 is not a required class. Oh, Alicia, sorry, we are gonna say something.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say like now might be a good time for our
Okay,
like
got it.
before upper div break. So I'm gonna quickly like stop share. And then we can probably post announcements like, hey, we're talking about upper division now. Or general rather, not announcements. And I can pause recording. So be right back. Okay.
Cool. So I'll say Stat 135 is the primary stats theory class that Berkeley will offer. So a lot of the stuff in Stat 135 you might have seen, especially if you're a data science major, in um, Data 8, Data 100, even Stat 140, but they don't go into it that rigorously. And I'd say Stat 135 is the only one that goes into all these stat topics rigorously. So even if you have taken Data 100 and seen hypothesis testing there, or Data 8's hypothesis testing, or the auxiliary topics in Stat 140, I'd still recommend you take Stat 135 just to really get a good grasp of all of this. So just some topics that they go over in Stat 135 include descriptive statistics, maximum likelihood estimation, non-parametric methods, introduction to optimality, goodness of fit test, analysis of variance, bootstrap, computer intensive methods, and least squares estimation. So as you can see, it covers a wide range of like just statistical theory topics. And just from my experience applying to grad school for data science or stats, taking a class like Stat 135 is basically required. So if you're interested in that, you kind of have to take Stat 135. Some prereqs for Stat 135, you need to have a probability course before it because they kind of assume that you know about random variables. So Stat 135 builds upon the content you learned in Stat 134 or Stat 140. So Stat 134, Stat 140 are hard prereqs. Math 54, I don't know if it's a hard prereq, but just from my experience, especially with like least squares estimators, you definitely do need to know a little bit of linear algebra. So I'd highly recommend you have that, even if it isn't a strong prereq. And Stat 133 is recommended, although I will say you can easily go by without it, just because the R that you do in Stat 135 isn't super intensive. And a lot of the R methods that you do during homeworks can just be looked up online and just applied. So this is a 4-unit class. There isn't a discussion section per se. It's instead called a 2-hour lab. But from when I was in the class, it was essentially just a discussion section. The class size isn't too big. It's about 180, and the professor is to be announced. And it says here to sign up phase 1, although I will say, just from, again, my experience in Stat 135, I haven't really had any enrollment troubles with this. So if you enroll phase 1, you're basically 100% guaranteed to get it despite your enrollment time. If you enroll phase 2, you might be placed in the waitlist for a little bit, but I'm almost certain that you'll get off the waitlist. So just for context, I phase 2 Stat 135 and I was able to get in pretty easily.
Okay, we're moving on to Data 100, which is, again, a very popular class. So essentially, this is just going through the entire data science lifecycle, like including question formulation, data transformation, cleaning, EDA and visualization, inference and prediction, and decision making. This is essentially like, again, we mentioned this before, but if you have the choice between taking Stat 133 and Data 100 plus Stat 33B, really highly recommend, really highly recommend taking Data 100 and 33B because it will be much more helpful. And also Data 100 is pretty much like, I think lots of the questions that you might be asked on data science interviews, like your answers to those might be in Data 100 versus maybe they won't be in Stat 133. And so the prereqs are Data 8, one of like 61A, CS 88, or Engineering 7, and then Math 54 or EE 16A concurrently. And it is 4 units. There's a 1-hour lab and a 1-hour discussion per week. The professor is TBA, but I think it's pretty much like similar in experience, like whoever you take it with. The class size is 604 on classes.berkeley right now. I think they have expanded it in the past, but at the same time, this is a class that like so many people are trying to take. I definitely think that you shouldn't chance it and you should just phase 1 because I assume that if a lot of you guys are data science or stats majors, you do need this. And so I would just phase 1. Okay, this is a new class actually. So I guess like if you have any specific questions about like what it's like to be in the class, we don't necessarily know, but next semester they're offering Data 101 for the first time, which is going to be data engineering. And it's basically covering like the principles and practices of managing data at large scales with a focus on use cases in data analysis and machine learning. And so it goes over the data management like life cycle, and it goes from like preparation and all of that stuff to like exploration, visualization, analysis, and then also to like ML applications with a focus on ensuring reliable and scalable operationalization. Sorry. And so the prereqs are a CS61B and like Data 100 or CS 189 or Data 144. And those are enforced prereqs. I have heard online, like even though this isn't a class that exists yet, I have heard online that it is like a subset of the information that's in CS 186. So that's a class we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into some of the upper div CS classes that you might be interested in taking as a data science major. But I have heard it is kind of like taking a little bit of the information from 186, but again, it hasn't been offered before as a class. The units are TBA and the discussion section are also TBA, but it is at least 3 hours of lecture. Oh, okay. Apparently on Data Piazza, advisors said it's going to be 4 units. So that's really good to know. Thank you, chat. The class size is 200. And so I would say probably if you're like really, really interested in taking this class, I would recommend phase 1 just because like I think a lot of these like smaller data science upper division classes like Data 144 or whatever like end up filling up really, really fast, even though all of the seats are given to data science majors, but it's just like people really want to take data science upper divs. But again, like there isn't really enrollment history on this. So like if you're like, you know, dying to take Data 101, I would just phase 1 it to be safe. But yes, definitely an exciting new course offering. Okay, Data 102. So this class we mentioned before, you can take it in and it fulfills requirements in both the data science and stats majors. But it's developing the probabilistic foundations of inference in data science and building a comprehensive view of modeling and decision-making life cycle in data science, including its social, human, and ethical implications. There's basically a grab bag of a bunch of different topics, but they include frequentist invasion, decision-making, permutation testing, false discovery rate, experimental design, confidence intervals, causal inference, Thompson sampling, optimal control, Q-learning, differential privacy, clustering algorithms, recommendation systems, and an introduction to ML tools, including decision trees, neural networks, and ensemble methods. I will say, like, that is a huge mouthful. If you've taken any other like data science upper divs or like CS upper divs or anything like that, you might have some like overlap between those classes. Like for instance, I took CS 188 before I took Data 102. And there was like a homework where I was like, oh, or like there was a lab where I was like, oh, this is like really easy for me because I've already taken CS 188. Or like people who already know about causal inference, like the causal inference section for them is going to be pretty easy because like they've already learned it. But it is like just a really good like kind of wide net to cast on like some of the like stats, data science, CS upper division topics. For prereqs, these are enforced, Math 54 or equivalent, Data 100, and then Stat 134/140 or like the equivalents that we talked about before. It's 4 units. There's a 1-hour lab and 1-hour discussion per week. The professor is to be announced. The class size is 240, which again, like what I was saying with 101, you should probably phase 1 it because it fills up extremely, extremely fast. Like I remember one semester, I was trying to take it for like 3 semesters before I actually got it, even though it literally has reserved seats for data science majors. So it does fill up like quite fast. But yes. Jay, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, my bad. Um, yeah, for CS 189, it's kind of like the main machine learning class that CS majors, even data science majors will end up taking. One thing to know about CS 189, it's not too important, but it's essentially an undergrad and grad class too. So you'll be with other grad students as well. So you'll be going over the same content, but they'll have like a graduate project on the side while you'll instead just do the midterms and the finals and the homework assignments. So keep that in mind. So it is like meant for like graduate students as well. So understand that when you're going into some of the material here. So here are some of the things I want to and talk about. Theoretical foundations of machine learning, algorithms, method applications. So for example, in the beginning, you do a lot of regression and classification. So some of them come as linear models, trees, neural networks, ensemble methods, instance-based methods. You also do some generative and discriminative probability methods, Bayesian parametric learning, density estimation and clustering, Bayesian networks, time series models, dimensionality. It basically goes over like a bunch of machine learning topics in just one class. So in a way, it's good and bad, just because from when I was taking it, we kind of covered a lot, but we didn't go extremely deep into a lot of topics. Me personally, I found some of the stuff in CS 189 more intuitive because I took a lot of stat theory classes before taking 189. So some of the concepts came a little bit easier to me. Meanwhile, if you didn't take some stat classes, it can be a little bit harder. But nonetheless, the prereqs for the class are Math 53, Math 54, and some sort of probability course. Could be Stat 134, could be Stat 140, could be EE 126 if you want. But you just need some sort of probability theory course. Actually, I think CS 70 would work for the probability theory course as well. It's a 4-unit class, but keep in mind, this isn't just a regular 4-unit class. This is definitely a lot harder of a 4-unit class. I'd say this is a good blend of like difficult, like this is gonna be very challenging academically, plus the homework assignments will take very long usually. There are about 7 homework assignments throughout the semester, and each one has a theoretical part to it and a coding part to it. So keep in mind, like this is a very time-consuming class. It's a 1-hour discussion per week. Professor, it's to be announced, but I think for fall, if you look at like, let's say, what's the name? Sahai. If you look at Sahai's 189 website, I think fall machine learning, fall CS 189 is always modeled off of that content. So if you are taking in fall, I'd say go to Sahai's website to see how it's taught and the homework assignments are over there. When to sign up, phase 1, definitely phase 1, especially if you're not a CS major. One thing to note about 189 is they've added a data science section too. So because they've added a data science section, if you're a data science major, you do have a reserved seat in the data science section. But if you're not a CS or data science major, you essentially have zero uh, reserved seats in this class. You're put immediately on the wait list. And the way the wait list works is it gets reorganized at the end of adjustment period. So even if you are like, let's say right before adjustment period, like second on the wait list, it'll reorganize it to put the CS people on top, to put the CS people over you. So because they still will have priority. So I highly recommend you phase 1 as soon as possible, because there is a lot of challenges even getting into the class when you phase 1. So keep that in mind. And one thing to note is this class is very different than Data 102. Both are essentially machine learning classes, but this one definitely has a much more CS and math feel to the class, while I think Data 102 goes a lot deeper into the statistical theory. And this one will cover a lot of a larger range of machine learning topics that you might see in the workplace, while I think Data 102 specializes specifically in certain inference topics and certain models, but they don't have the total breadth of CS 189, I'd say. So even though both are modeling classes, I'd say if you want a more general machine learning class, take 189. But if you want to go deeper into the stats theory, or you see yourself doing like an inference related position, in the future, then take data 102 instead.
Yeah, to add on to that, we don't have a specific slide that's like comparing all of the like modeling classes that you can choose between for the data science major. But often because all of the classes like that they put under this one umbrella are so different, lots of people will take multiple classes out of that like list. Like it's very common to see people that take like all of like 102 and like 182 and 189 because all of those classes are quite different. And you'll learn something different from all of them, even though technically like for the major, you just need to have one of them to count under that bucket of like modeling. Oh no, I skipped a slide. Okay, so I think that's the end of our specific courses that are under the stats and data science major. But now we're going to go into other classes, specifically other upper division classes to consider if you're a data science or stats major, or just like someone who's interested in technical upper division. The first one is Math 110, which is that more advanced linear algebra class that I was talking about when I talked about 54. There is a lot of stuff that like, if you just take 54 and then you take 110 right after, like you're gonna have an easy time because there is a lot of like refreshing what happened in 54. But they will add on other things as well. Specifically, the main thing that they add on is Jordan canonical form, which I've heard is also taught in Math H54. So if you take the honors 54, like maybe you'll have even an easier time in 110. And the prereqs are like 1A and 1B, or like the equivalents, 54 or like an equivalent. And then it might also be helpful, but it's not necessary to have like a discrete math course. So Math 55 or CS 70, just because this class does have some proofs. And generally, I guess like a lot of people's introduction to proofs will be in Math 55 or CS 70. It's a 4-unit class and it's like a 1-hour discussion per week. The professor this upcoming term is Gomez, and the class size is 400, which is quite big. But again, like maybe consider signing up phase 1 just because a lot of majors do require 110, or they'll like have 110 in a list of options of like something that they require, including like COE and natural sciences. So if you are really hankering to take 110, maybe phase 1 to be safe. I don't think it's like too heinous to like phase 2. Like it's not like CS 189 where like you got to get on there as soon as possible, but soft recommendation for phase 1. Okay, on to econ classes with Megan.
All right, we're going to speed run a couple of econ classes that a lot of SAASs have taken in the past and or are common to take for data science majors. So first of all, econ 100A/B versus econ 101A/B. All right, so econ 100A and B are the microeconomics and macroeconomics courses in the economics department. So the difference between 100 and 101 is that 100 is more general purpose micro macro class, while 101 is more specialized in mathematics. So basically 101 is more mathy. The 100 series builds directly upon 1 or 2. It's more conceptual. You don't really go into deriving any of the equations that you will use. Yeah, and it's great to dip your toes in for microeconomics as a non-econ major. However, if you are a more mathematical major and want to take a more mathematical approach to economics, I would recommend the 101 series because it is relatively math and theory heavy, and you will see how you derive a lot of the equations used in economics. For example, like supply and demand curve. That is mathematically derived using calculus from the utility codes. I would say 101A and B, 101A at least, I didn't take 101B, but 101A is harder than 100A, but relatively speaking, the curve is better. And also, if you already have a strong mathematical background, as in you are pretty familiar with partial derivatives and you're pretty good with calculus, I don't think 101A is that much of a challenge. And from what I've heard, the material is definitely more interesting than 100A. For Econ 100B versus 101B, this is where things will get a bit wonky because that is macroeconomics. I, for some reason, have heard from people who have taken 101B that 101B is actually less mathematical than 100B, even though it's not supposed to. I think it has a lot to do with the guy usually teaching 100B is Hawkins, and he is a quant hedge fund guy, so he loves bringing math into everything. Like he does probability and stuff too. So if you're going for the Hawkins version of 100B, he definitely makes you derive everything, and it's still pretty mathematical. I can't speak too much about 101B because I haven't taken it, but I think in comparison to Hawkins 100B, 101B isn't necessarily more mathematical. Yeah, and as it says, the decision between the two should be based on your mathematical interest or mathematical ability. Econ 140 versus Econ 141. So these are the econometric classes for the economics major. Like before, the 0 series of 140 is a more conceptual and less math heavy. Yeah, no, for 140, it's like less math background is required, and it could feel slow if you know linear regression well and if you've taken probability. 141 is a much more stats focused course. And yeah, it does depend on the professor. Again, yeah, not too much economics background is required. So for both classes, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's more, the class feels more like applying statistics in economic data rather than like an economics course. For 141, I think like not much coding experience is required. They will force you to use Stata or R or Python if you want, but I would say it's pretty easy to pick up, especially if you're doing R Stata, which is usually what the GSIs are familiar with. They do a quick crash course at the beginning of the course to get you caught up with that. However, 141 is very math and theory heavy. So what they do in the first 3 weeks of the course is they do a speed run version of Stat 140/134 to get you familiar with the probability background. And that is used to calculate a lot of the stuff you'll see later in the course. So they do I would say like a little bit of multivariable calculus, but if you know partial derivatives, you should be good on that front. Oh, and Lagrange error, if you know Lagrange and partials, you'll be fine. You definitely will have a lot easier time if you know linear algebra, but they do spend a lot of the course talking about linear algebra. So even if you don't have too much background in that, you'll be good. I think the major limiting factor here is probability. If you don't have any background in probability, I think 141 will be very difficult because probability is abstract and kind of hard to catch up on. And they speed run that in the first 3 weeks. So plus a lot of people in 141 have taken Stat 140 or 134 in the past. So that does put you at a disadvantage there. It's not to say that you can't do it, but you will have to put a lot of grind into it to do it. I would say from 141, what I've seen in the past, a lot of people who take 141 are doubling in like kind of math major, like CS, stats, data science, something like that. While a lot of like pure econ majors tend to go towards 140. With that said, 141's curve is a lot better than 140. I think the average for 140 is a B or B plus, while the average for 141 is an A minus. So yeah, there's a big difference in the mathematical maturity and depth needed for the two, but you can weigh that against the curve and see which one is better suited for you. 136, financial economics. So I remember before there was a question about fintech and quant and whatnot. I would say 136 pretty much covers all you would need if you want to work in a hedge fund role. So it teaches you a lot about the course covers options, bonds, and then interest rates and all that stuff. Yeah, the professor who teaches this is usually Hawkins, like next semester. He's like a quant hedge fund guy. So he designed this course specifically thinking he wanted more mathematical hedge fund people. This class is surprisingly very mathematical. He talks it, although you don't need to know probability, he talks a lot about probability. You definitely need to know calculus, a lot of deriving equations, a lot of equations in general. It's also very related to his 100B class. It plays a lot, especially for the options and bonds portion of the class. It brings in a lot of macroeconomic concepts. So yeah, the content is more related to 100B. So I would say like 101 as a prereq didn't help at all for this, except calculus. 100B helped a lot for this class. Surprising, it was a lot harder than I actually expected it to be. I would say it's more time consuming than an average econ class would be. So definitely budget your time for this. It's probably going to take more than 1 hour per week, just involving homework. I would say 2 to 3 hours per week. And this is a class you definitely need to phase one because econ majors also get priority in this. And this is a quick rundown of EAP/CS operatives, 126 and 127. I haven't taken these two, but from friends taking it right now. 126 is like the expansion path on the linear algebra portion of E16B. And 127 is optimization. So there's that. CS 170, efficient algorithms. This one is kind of like lead code expansion path. So what they do is they will present you with a problem, then teach you algorithms and approaches to solve problems. I personally really like the class. It's very theoretical, not really useful in anything except for interviews, but I found it really fun. Like the concepts are really fun. Yeah, in terms of time for that, the problem sets take a long time. So definitely budget like a good 4 to 5 hours per week for that. But alas, it was a really fun class. 182, designing, visualizing deep neural networks. I've never taken this one. If anybody asks, feel free to speak up. But from what I know, a lot of people take it after they take 189. And it's a very grad school-esque class, as in you read a lot of papers and then you analyze those papers. 186, introduction to databases, pretty much teaches you everything ranging from querying from a database, so SQL, to how to build a database and how to ensure integrity in a database. Yeah, it's not that bad as a class. The tests are kind of annoying. Projects are a bit time consuming, but they're fine. They're like average on the CS project scale. The tests are really annoying because they're counting and they're multiple choice. But I would say it's a class that you would take if you know you want to or probably will work with databases, but it's a very specialized class. So if you know, like, I don't want anything to do with databases in the future, then there's no point of taking it. 188, Introduction to Artificial Intelligence. This one is well, about artificial intelligence. I would say it's a cool, but probably not that applicable unless you want to do AI research class. It teaches you basic AI algorithms, learning models, and neural networks. It has like really cute illustrations of like in this entire class you're building with a Pac-Man game, like you're building AI for the Pac-Man to learn how to navigate the Pac-Man game most efficiently. Not the most useful class in the world in terms of utility, but it was a really fun class.
Yeah, I will echo something that was said last semester as well, in terms of, even though I think 188 maybe like it's not like the first thing that you'll reach for when you like have a data science interview or something, and it might not be super applicable, but it's kind of worth to take it for the like fun class and also like the optics. Like on your resume when you say like AI, it can really help. And so like 188 is, I would say like, even if you just took it for the optics, like I would say it's still a worth it class to take. Yeah, just like my 2 cents on that. Okay. All right, Jay, do you have any thoughts on the EECS upper divs that you would recommend people take?
I would say, yeah, it's like specifically, I'm not too sure how many people want to do like a more like applied sort of like software job. But if you want to do that, I definitely recommend something like CS 186, or some stuff not mentioned here would be like CS, 161 or 162, but classes that have more like projects involved with them. But I'd say these classes are pretty good, especially if you want to go into like a more ML or data science kind of CS role. So kind of like Megan said, 170s doesn't have too much like practical application, but it's very useful, especially the first part for interviews. I found like specifically dynamic programming like to be like a godsend for my interviews. So I'd basically say everyone should take 170. Yeah, but if you want to do like more deep learning, machine learning stuff, I'd say 182 would be great. 189 would be great. 188 I don't know too much about, but if you don't want to go like extremely heavy into machine learning, I think 188 would also be a great class. 126, 127, that's kind of up to you. I'd kind of advise against 126 if you're already doing stat 140. 127 can be pretty useful, especially if you want to prepare for 189. So if you want to like somewhat of a prep course before that, I'd recommend taking 127. But yeah, that's basically what I have to say about the EECS upper divs.
Great, awesome. So that is actually all of our slides for today. Final thoughts. Yeah, I think regardless like what you take, please like look up the professor on Rate My Professor to see what they're like, because that can drastically impact your experience in the class. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out on the advice channel in Slack, or like to any of the other SAASes to see what like classes were like for them, to like ask what you should take for specific career paths. We like to help each other out. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. There's a feedback form QR code if you want to fill that out. We'll stay on this slide, but now we're open to more free form Q&A. So if you have any like specific questions that are like, oh, like I'm taking these 4 classes, like what should I phase 1? Or like, what would you recommend for like this career path? We can go into that now. All right. Oh, and I can also turn off recording in case people are like shy XD. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop recording.